All right, you guys, y'all know what we're here to do. We are going to definitely talk about these McCall patterns, y'all. So I know it came out Monday, but better late than never. So let's go ahead and talk about it. So here's the thing, you guys. McCall is back with summer 2026, and I'm going to call this summer part two. And I honestly wasn't expecting this. So at first, I thought we were getting another collection full of easy wardrobe basics, basically, right? Then they introduced menswear. And just when I thought that this collection was going to be great, or I should say, just when I thought that I had this collection completely figured out, they opened the vault and brought back vintage patterns from the 60s and the 70s, which I'm not mad about that either. And now I have one big thought. Did McCall's finally give us something for everyone? Or does this feel like three completely different collections packed into one summer release? Marinate on that. But let's go ahead and take a look. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this video. Hey fam, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm Rochelle and I'm your pattern enabler and your instruction decoder. And on this channel, I love reviewing sewing patterns, building capsule wardrobe, and helping you decide which patterns are actually worth your time and your money. Yes, I do that. So today we are looking at McCall Summer 2026 patterns, and I'm going to say this is part two because I'm guessing that McCall's couldn't figure it out in part one of the summer patterns. So they decided to do part two. Okay. Now, I'm going to say this release definitely has a few surprises here and there, or do they? But we'll talk about that, okay? We'll also talk about my favorite patterns in the bunch, the biggest surprises that we have in the bunch, and which ones I'll buy right away, if there's any, which ones I am going to wait to catch the sale, which I'm going to say wait on, and we're going to talk about the ones that I'm going to definitely skip. And I'm also going to talk about whether this second summer release is actually worth adding to mine or yours or anyone's pattern stash, okay? Now, you guys all know I'm going to be honest about these patterns. So if that's what you want, go ahead, stay tuned. And I'm just going to say, go ahead. Right now is where you need to go ahead and grab your favorite drink, pop some popcorn, get comfortable, because right now is where we're going to go ahead and jump right on in. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right on into these patterns. All right, so let's go ahead and first talk about my overall thoughts. So I'm going to start with my overall thought for this collection. So the very first thing I noticed, this collection feels a little divided, all right? And I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way, or do I? So usually when a pattern company release a new collection, I can immediately tell what the theme, or I should say, what this collection is going to be. Maybe it's going to be like a relaxed resort wear or a tailored classic or an elevated basic or something like that, right? Now this time, McCall kind of said, why not give you all of it all at once? It's basically kind of like what they did in this one. So the first half of this release is basically full of easy to sew wardrobe staples pattern. And then they kind of pivot midway to the menswear. And then at the end, they wrapped everything up with the vintage reproduction, authentic reproduction, I should say, patterns from the 60s and the 70s. Now, honestly, it almost feels, like I said in the beginning, it feels like three collections instead of one. Like, I'm just going to call it what it is. It's 3 mini collections all in one release. And we're going to talk about that. Now that could be somewhat of a downside to this downside of this collection. But if you're someone who likes really a cohesive wardrobe or a seasonal release, I should say, that could be good. But it also means there's a pretty good chance you'll find at least one pattern that speaks to your style in this collection. All right. But let me say this. I also noticed something else. This collection isn't trying to reinvent sewing. Okay. There aren't oversized runway inspired coats in this collection. There aren't any complicated designer details in this collection whatsoever. Instead, this collection, McCall's really focused on patterns that people will actually make and hopefully actually wear, which is where they have easy to sew basic patterns, is what they came out with for part 2 of the summer collection. Now, let me say this. As someone who always talk about building a capsule wardrobe, I actually appreciate that because let's be honest, we've all bought patterns simply because they looked exciting, at least I did, right? Only for those to sit on the shelf or in your pattern stash for 3 years or 5 years or 10 years, some of us a little longer than that, right? Can I get a be quiet, Rochelle? Don't call me out, sis, on that in the comment section below. All right. But anyways, I'm just going to say, ask me how I know, because let me just be real with y'all. Because I'm talking about myself too. Okay. So while this collection may not be the most flashiest of the other collections, and let's just be real, in the last, I'm going to say 6 months, I haven't really seen a spectacular collection, but we're going to talk about that in a different video. All right. This is definitely one of the collections that feels practical, and sometimes practical can win. So let's go ahead and talk about what stands out about this release to me. All right. So let's go ahead and talk about it. All right. So listen, I'm going to say this. The more that I look through these patterns that came out with McCall's, the more I realize there are really 3 different stories that McCall is telling in this whole drop. Story number 1, easy sewing. So patterns like the shirt dress that they dropped, the knit top, the knit skirt, the lounge set, there are designed to help newer sewists build confidence, or I should say beginning sewists, I should say, right? These aren't intimidating patterns or intimidating projects or anything like that. They're approachable, they're wearable, they're great for filling in the gaps in your wardrobe, right? The second story that McCall's is trying to make in this release, right, is menswear, right? And honestly, some may be happy to see these because since they normally they leave the men out a lot of the times. One thing I hear all the time is there aren't enough men patterns out there in the, the big 4. Or should I say big 5? I don't know if I should say big 5 because, yeah, big 4 patterns, okay? Now, McCall didn't give us dozens of men patterns, but they did give us some solid options in the menswear patterns, which I'm going to share with you guys during the patterns when I tell all the patterns, right? So some of them that they gave us was a relaxed camp shirt. I did see that. They also gave us a retro inspired shirt. They gave us some pleated trousers, and they gave us one of my favorites, a functional windbreaker. Okay. that's a nice mix for what they gave us in the men's wear section. All right. And then the third story that they told in this drop was vintage. Okay. And this is where they went to the archive. They went to the vault on this, right? Now, this is where the collection suddenly became much more interesting during the vintage. And I was surprised because normally the vintage patterns don't speak to me, but there was a few of them that I could see here and there. So instead of creating like new designs inspired by vintage fashion, McCall's bought back the authentic reproduction patterns from the 60s and the 70s, which I'm going to be honest, the vintage era that I like would be the 70s and the 80s. Okay. So if you guys remember, I did a vintage member, which I'll talk about here shortly. And that's the era that I really enjoyed sewing. But whether vintage sewing is your thing or not, some may actually appreciate it when these original designs become available again, because if you missed it the first time around when they originally dropped it, it gives you time to get the pattern again. So if you missed it the first time around, when they dropped it in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, it's your chance to get those vintage patterns reproduced, or reproduction, I should say, patterns. It gives you a chance to get them this time around. So, definitely. These could definitely feel like a capsule wardrobe for you. And while others could easily be, that item that you could sew today, sew tomorrow, sew whatever, right? If you use modern fabrics for these vintage patterns, it could take it to something completely different. And if you use the right fabric, you could take an older pattern and make it current, right? That's something we'll talk about as we go through each pattern as well, all right? And speaking of patterns, let's talk about some trends that I've seen with these 13 patterns, all right? So before we jump into these 13 individual patterns, short and quickly, I'm going to do the short and quickly with these 13 patterns. Let's talk about some of the trends that I noticed, all right? Let's go ahead and talk about it. All right, so some of the trends that I noticed, let's talk about the first one. So the first trend that I noticed in this collection was comfort. Did you guys not notice that a lot of these patterns that dropped with McCall's was all about comfort? Nearly every modern pattern in this release prioritized ease of wear, relaxed silhouettes, elastic waistbands, knits, oversized fit, soft layers. None of that is surprising because comfort is still a huge part of fashion nowadays. All right. The second thing that I noticed was a versatility, right? Several of these patterns can be dressed up, they can be dressed down, dependent entirely on the fabric choice. That's always something I look for before I spend my money on a pattern. Okay, you want to look at how versatile a pattern can be. And it can make this, and if you can make this more than once, all right, and have each version in mind, right? And then decide on how you want to make each version feel completely different than the last one you made. If you're going to make 2, if you're going to make 3, if you're going to make 4 of the same pattern, all right? If the answer to that question is yes, that's usually a good investment of the pattern that you are going to be picking up or making, all right? And the last thing that I noticed with this collection, I noticed McCall leaned into that nostalgia, right? And the reason why I say that is because the vintage fashion continues to cycle back around, especially styles from that late 60s and 70s. So rather than simply following that trend, McCall's reach back into their archive, and that's a fun way to celebrate their history while also giving today's sewists access to the designs that many of us have never had a chance to really make back then, and some now, because if, like I say, after about a year and a half, 2 years, McCalls tend to get rid of patterns. So if you miss it, sometimes if you do not get the patterns when they first release, you could literally just miss it, and you may have to go to eBay, Etsy, or on Amazon, right? And try to get it. And at that point, the pattern is $10 to $20. So if you see a pattern that you want, I'm just going to say get it then and think about it later. All right. So now that I talked about that, let's take a closer look at each pattern and see which ones really stand out. All right. So without further ado, let's look at these 13 patterns that dropped. Now, it was originally 16 patterns that dropped, but I'm not going to cover any of the kids' patterns whatsoever. Now, I will kind of highlight, I think it's 1 or 2 pajama patterns quickly, but I'm only going to talk about 13 patterns. All right. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into these 13 patterns. All right, you guys, so let's go ahead and start with the 13 patterns. But first, let's start with the easy to sew patterns because they make up majority of this release. Now, I have my notes, I have my tablet also that I am also going to be looking at to tell you what these patterns are. All right. So instead of me actually sharing my screen like I normally do, I am going to put the patterns up on the screen so you're able to see it and talk through it. However, I am going to give my own rendition because I already looked at all of these patterns and kind of made my own notes for all of these patterns. All right. So let's go ahead and get into it. Now, one thing I'm going to say that I appreciate, McCall knows exactly who these patterns are for. All right. They're not trying to overwhelm beginners, beginning sewists whatsoever. Instead, I'm going to say that they're giving people projects they can actually finish, wear, and definitely build on. That's what McCall's decided to do in this release. All right. But let's see if they succeeded. Okay. So let's go ahead and get into the first pattern. All right. So the first pattern is a easy shirt dress. Being all of these are McCall, so I'm just going to tell the number. First pattern is 8669. All right. Now, 8669 is an easy shirt dress. And I have to say that this was one of the first patterns that caught my attention. And the reason why is because I love a good shirt dress. They're comfortable, they're easy to style, and they work for so many different occasions. This one has a nice relaxed silhouette, a practical button placket, a classic collar, and short sleeve. All right, so nothing about this design is trying too hard, number one. Now, sometimes that's exactly what your wardrobe needs. This is easy to sew. It comes in one pattern envelope. So it comes in extra small to extra, extra large. Some of the fabric suggestions are your chambray, your cotton blends, your denim, or your rayons. All right. Now, if I was making this, I'll probably do one in linen or in a chambray, or maybe one in a rayon print for vacation. Now, I could also see shortening this into a tunic. I could see pockets are included in the line art. If you look at the line art, it shows that pockets are included as well. Now, those are little small changes that can really make a basic pattern work in your wardrobe. Now, I will say this. My only hesitation with this pattern is that if you've been sewing for a while, you may already own something similar to this pattern, which of course y'all know I already own something similar to this pattern, and that would be McCall's 85 Now, you guys already know I'm going to put the pattern up on the screen, so you do not have to ask me whatsoever. And anything I mention pattern-wise or video-wise will be linked in the description box below. So open it up so you can see as well. All right, so McCall's 8508 is very similar to this pattern as well. So a shirt dress isn't exactly groundbreaking, I would say, but if you don't already have one, this is a really solid option. Now, let me just say this. For me, this one's an easy skip. Why? Because I already have a pattern that's very similar. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the next pattern. Next up is 8670. And 8670 is a asymmetrical knit top. All right, now, I have to admit this. When I first saw this one, I wasn't completely convinced, all right? So I thought, okay, another knit top, like, come on. But then I started looking a little closer. That asymmetrical neckline gave it just enough interest without actually making it feel trendy for the sake of being trendy. And those side gathers, they're doing a lot of the work here anyway. All right. So they create shape, they add a little texture, and they make the top look a little more elevated than your average t-shirt. Now, this is the kind of top I'll pair with some jeans or a satin skirt, or maybe wear under a blazer for work. It has enough details that people might ask, where the hell did you buy that from, girl? And that's always fun when you could say, I'm sorry, I made it. All right. This one can definitely grow on me, I would say. Now, let's be honest. Would I make 5 of these? Absolutely no. I wouldn't even say absolutely no. I wouldn't even say probably no. Definitely no is what I'm going to say. Would I make 1? Possibly. But using a pattern I already have that is very similar, which I'll share that momentarily, so just hold your horses. But let's get into this pattern. Now, McCall's 8670 is a hip length pullover top with short dolman sleeves, a V-back, and side ruching. Now, it comes in one pattern envelope, extra small to extra, extra large. Some of the fabric suggestions would be your challis, chambray, linen, silky type, just to name a few. This one is a skip for me since I have a few similar patterns that is very similar to this. Now, a few of the similar patterns would be McCall 7955. You could also use New Look 6701. Another good pattern would be McCall 6562. Another one would be Simplicity 3233. And then the last pattern that's very similar to this is Simplicity 9230. Those are all patterns that are very similar to 8670. So once again, this pattern is 8670. Let's go ahead and move over to the next pattern, being this crazy knit maxi skirt, okay? Very easy to sew once again. This is 8671, the knit maxi skirt. Now, one thing I'm going to say about this is this one gave me pretty much mixed feelings, all right? Because on one hand, I absolutely understand why McCall's included it, I guess. So a knit maxi skirt is very comfortable, it's easy to wear, and let's be honest, it's really beginner friendly too. I get that, right? But on the other hand, I can't help but ask myself, and all of you too, how many of us already own a pattern that looks almost identical? And here's the thing, there's nothing wrong with this skirt. But let's be honest, most of us own anywhere from 5 to 10 different copies across the big 4 brands of this pattern, right? Across all 4 brands, whether it's Simplicity, McCall's, Butterick, Vogue, you name it, we own anywhere from 5 to 10 of this basic knit maxi dress. All right. Now I'll discuss the similar patterns here shortly, but I actually think it'll sew up really nicely. All right. So I just don't know if it's bringing anything new to the table, to be honest. But if you're building your first handmade wardrobe, I should say, I'm just going to say go for it. But if your pattern collection already has several knit skirts, I should say, I'll probably save my money if I were you. I'm just saying. All right. But sometimes not buying another pattern is the smartest sewing decision that we'll make as well. But let's get into this pattern. Now, this is a slim fitting midi length knit skirt. It features a hidden elastic for a smooth, sleek look. The skirt includes a high side front walking slit and a lace trim hem for a clean and pretty finish. Now, for me, this one is definitely a skip. And the reason why is because I own it, and I'm pretty sure we all own a pattern like this. But go to your pattern stash and see if you have one of the following patterns, all right? So some of the patterns that are very similar to this pattern would be, number one, would be McCall 6654. Now, McCall 6654 came out way back in the days. If you do not have that pattern, one of the most recent patterns for this one is McCall's 8055, which is pretty much the same pattern, all right? Now, if you do not have that pattern or either one of those patterns, you can also use McCall's 3830, which is way back in, I want to say 2011, 2012. But the most up-to-date pattern for that one, which is the same pattern, which is McCall's 8051. That is also the same pattern as well. All right. So once again, that is McCall's 8671. Let's go ahead and get into the next pattern. Next up is McCall's 8672. 8672 is a cami and short lounge set. All right. So I do like the gathered camisole for this one. The peplum adds a little bit of personality to this, and the shorts look comfortable without being oversized. So I think the design would work for this one as well. Now, this is a pullover baby doll top, features a elastic empire waistline with a ruffle and pull-on shorts with a wide elastic waistband. This pattern comes in one pattern envelope, extra small to extra, extra large. And some of the fabric suggestions would be cotton lawn, gauze, linen, or silky type. Now, for me, this is a wait till a McCall sale. So I'm on the fence with this one because it is pretty much pajamas, but I can see it, you know, so this would be a wait. All right. But once again, it's 8672. Moving over to the next pattern is 8673. This is an athleisure set or collection, I should say. Now, this one is pretty much the last one in this category, easy to sew. And I think it's going to be one of the best sellers in this easy to sew collection. All right. And honestly, it feels very current. And this one, we got the relaxed wide leg pants. And I love this wide leg pants. All right. Now, these are the kind of pants, you know, that work from home people will literally live in, work in, sleep in. Yeah. So whether you're working from home or running errands or traveling or just having a casual weekend, these pants just make sense for sure. All right. So let's go ahead and talk about these pants. So this pattern is a very loose fitting pull-on pants with double row elastic waistline casing, side seam pockets, back patch pockets, and a mock fly front detail. The balloon shaped legs are created with front pleats and controlled at the leg hems with darts, all with some top stitching as well. Now, this pattern comes in one pattern envelope, extra small to extra, extra large. Some of the fabric suggestions would be your cotton, your linen, or your gabardine. All right. Now, overall, I think this is one of the strongest, easy to sew pattern in this entire release. So this would definitely be a buy for me. All right. So with that being said, after looking through the easy to sew section, let's talk about where I am landing on this section. So my favorites from this group, easy to sew, are definitely McCall's 8669, 8670, 8672, and 8673. All right. Those are the ones I can most easily picture myself making and wearing. Now, let's switch gears completely because McCall takes us in a very different direction with their men's collection. All right. And before we get there, let me show you one pajama pattern, which is McCall's 8684. And let's go ahead and talk about this pattern real quick. So 8684 is a knit semi-fitted pullover top with either long or short sleeves and a ribbon bow accent, right? So it's a pull-on semi-fitted short and pant which features a mock fly front with button trim, ribbon bow, and a contrast elastic waistline casing. So the shorts have slightly curved hem and the white leg pants have side seam pockets. Now the pattern comes in one envelope, extra small to extra, extra large, and some of the fabric suggestions, which would be your stretch knits. All right. So once again, this pattern is 8684. So now with that, let's go ahead and talk about the men's collection. All right, so let's dive into the men's section, or menswear, I should say. Okay, so I have to say this. This was probably the biggest surprise of the entire release. I wasn't expecting McCall's to include 3 menswear patterns. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that. But honestly, they didn't do bad on this one. They didn't. All right. So one thing I've heard from viewers over the years is there just aren't enough modern men's patterns, right? And let's just be real. I understand that. Now, I don't think 3 patterns suddenly solves, that problem, but it's definitely a step in the right direction, I would say. And what one could really appreciate is that these don't feel overly trendy. The menswear collection, these definitely feel wearable. They feel easy. I wouldn't say easy to sew, but they do feel easy. But let's go ahead and take a closer look at these 3 menwear patterns. All right. Starting with 8685. All right. Now, 8685 is a camp shirt and pant pattern. All right. So the first thing that caught my attention with this pattern is that it's a camp shirt. So the camp shirt has been everywhere lately. Let me say that for the people in the back. Camp shirts have been everywhere lately. They're relaxed, they're comfortable. I even made one. Was it earlier in the year or was it last year? It was actually last year. So anyway, they're one of the garments that looks great in almost any fabric, okay, for the camp shirt. Now, let's go ahead and talk about this pattern. Now, the men's relaxed camp shirt and tailor pants set is what this is. The shirt features short raglan sleeves and a casual, easy fit for warm weather. And the taper pants, they sit about 1 inch below the waist and includes front pleats, a button fly closure, and practical pockets for a clean, modern silhouette. Now, the pattern also comes in one pattern envelope, and that's small to extra, extra large. Some of the fabric suggestions would be your chambray, your cotton, linen. And for the pants, you could either use cotton blends, linen, or stretch woven. All right. Now, for this, I could definitely see myself making this in a linen or a cotton lawn, rayon I'm talking about the camp shirt, or even a rayon. I could also see a fun Ankara print if I was doing this for a vacation as well. All right. So now let's talk about the pants. So I like that McCall's kept them clean and classic. The pants doesn't look like they're baggy or anything like that. And I do like that they're not skinny either. So I don't like men with skinny jeans, but to each his own, right? On that front line, right? Now, they're just a nice everyday kind of trousers for this one. That could work for a lot of different age groups, a lot of different occasions. And that's important. Not every pattern has to chase the latest fashion trend either. So I do appreciate that. And sometimes people just want clothes they'll actually wear, right? So if I were wearing, or I should say, if I was wearing this, I would definitely, pair this with, as is, camp shirt and a pair of pants. Now, let me say this, because y'all know I don't sew for my husband, so let's just get that out the way. He's still waiting on his shirts. But that's besides the point, right? So if I was sewing this for my husband or another family member, right, this would definitely be on my list, right? Now, let me just be real with you guys. For me, this one's a solid pattern that I will be buying, okay, for two reasons. I like the camp style shirt, and because if I wanted to do a family photo, I could have this to sew up for my husband as well. Now, before you even get on me and be like, girl, when you go sew your husband his shirt or whatever, it's still a work in progress, okay? I didn't say when I was going to sew it. I just said I will sew it, okay? Don't give me a time frame because I don't like deadlines. Y'all know how I deal with these deadlines. Oh my God. All right. So if you want to save money for this pattern, I'm just going to say for the shirt, you can use the following patterns. All right. So you can use Simplicity 90 to 79, I believe. You could also use McCall 6972. You could also use Simplicity 9960 or McCall's 8486. All right. So those four patterns you could use for the camp shirt if you want to save some dough. If you want to save your money, you can just use those patterns for the camp shirt. I don't remember the pattern for the pants. I think it's 80, 85, 88, I think, or 84, 88. Once I find the number to the pants, it's flat front elastic back, I believe. I'll put it in the description box below. All right. All right. So let's go ahead and get into the next pattern. Pattern number 2 for the men's wear is 8686. And this one is a retro shirt. Retro shirt. I hope men's are not wearing skirts, but to each his own. Retro shirt and pleated trousers. Okay. Now, this one can somewhat caught my attention also. And I actually think this could be one of the strongest men's pattern in the entire collection. But hear me out. And the reason why I say that is because the contrast pockets on this one, the retro styling on this one, the pleated trousers on this one, it all comes together really nicely. It has personality without looking more like a costume. If you know, you know. And that's not always easy to do, if you know what I mean, right? So the shirt feels inspired by vintage fashion for sure, but it still looks modern enough that someone could wear it today without looking like they're heading to a theme party. You know what I mean? Okay. Now, let's talk about those pleated trousers. Now, I know pleats can be a little controversial. Let's just put it out there. So people love them. Some people avoid them completely. All right, let's just be real with that. Now, I love to see them sewn in like a beautiful linen or even a lightweight twill for the fall. All right. So for me, this one is definitely a skip. And the reason why is because I could just pull a similar pattern out of my stash. And when I say that, let's talk about some of the patterns that you can use. So for this one, you can use McCall's 8414. You could also use Simplicity 3075. And you could also use McCall's 8589. So out of those three patterns, you can use those three patterns and pretty much achieve what you want. Okay? So now that I talked about that, let's go ahead and get into the next pattern, which is 8687, and that is a hooded windbreaker. All right. So this one right here surprised me. I wasn't expecting a windbreaker in the summer, but this is part 2 of the summer, so let's talk about it. Now, the reason why this kind of surprised me is mostly because it's probably the most technical pattern in the entire collection because, they started off with the easy to wear or easy to sew, I should say, pattern, then the menswear pattern, and then ended up with the vintage patterns, right? So I'm going to say this is probably the most technical pattern in the entire collection. And this isn't just a windbreaker pattern or another, I should say this is not like another shirt pattern or a pair of pant pattern. This is going to be a project, that you're going to have to do with this windbreaker. All right. And the reason why is because you got zippers, you got the hood, you got the pockets, you got the drawstring, all those little details you have for this pattern. And that makes outerwear, I wouldn't say rewarding, but some people may think that outerwear is very rewarding to sew. Now, I like sewing outerwear, but that's just me. You could call me crazy. But I actually like sewing outerwear. I like sewing blazers and jackets and stuff like that. Not all the time, but from time to time, I do like sewing blazers. And I do have an orange blazer over here that I will be finishing up, which the next live will be on the 31st. But anyway, now let's say, would I recommend this as someone's very first garment? Definitely not. But if you've been sewing for a little while and you're looking for something to help level up, now this could be pretty much a really fun challenge for you. So let's talk about what this pattern, the windbreaker, is. So this pattern is a front zip hooded jacket, which features a front flap pocket and side seam pockets for convenient storage. Now, it also features a corded waist, a elastic cuffs with adjustable snap, and finished with a back ring flap. Now, this pattern is also like a lightweight windbreaker. It's one of those jackets you'll reach for all the time. So this jacket would be great for travel, for walking, for sporting events, from running any type of errands that you have, because this one, it would be very useful. And when you make it yourself, you get to choose colors and fabric that you probably wouldn't find anywhere else, right? So when you choose the fabrics and the colors that you want, it's not going to be something that you can just go grab off the shelf. You make it the way that you want it. And that's always a bonus. All right. Now, from the website, this pattern is an average to sew. It comes in one pattern envelope, which is extra small to extra, extra large. And some of the fabric suggestions from the website would be your cotton blends, your linen, and your ripstop nylon. So One thing I would say is that I could even see someone actually color blocking this windbreaker, which would be dope. I could also see adding like a reflective zipper tape for this one, or even making it in like a bold waterproof fabric. All right, so I could definitely see that. So there's a lot of room to personalize this windbreaker for sure. Now, for moi, right? This one is definitely going to be a buy as soon as it's on sale. All right. So let's talk about wrapping this men's collection up before we get to the vintage patterns, right? So overall, I think McCall's did a really nice job with the menswear. Now, could they have released more than just 3 menwear patterns? Absolutely. Okay. So my personal favorites is definitely 86, 85 and 86, 87 in this menswear collection. Now, just when I thought the collection couldn't have surprised me more with the menswear section, McCall's did something that you probably wasn't expecting, and that's because they decided that they were going to reach in the archives and bring out the vintage classics, okay? And honestly, this is where the collection became a little bit more interesting. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about the vintage collection. All right, so this is where McCall's completely changed the conversation, all right? So up until this point, we've been looking at modern basic, menswear, completely or comfortable everyday pieces, and then boom, like a 808, right? They open up the archives, and now we're looking at authentic, reproduced 1960s and 1970s throwbacks. So let's take a look at them. All right. So let's talk about the first one. First one is McCall's 8691. All right. So let's say if you're a fan of 1960s fashion, you're probably already smiling from ear to ear. And the reason why is because this pattern is an empire waist dress. All right. So the sleeves, and then if you think about it, this pattern definitely captures that era of the 60s for sure. But let's talk about the pattern, all right? So this pattern is a pullover dress with long or short raglan sleeves. The dress is gathered along, or I should say above the waistline. The upper edge of the dress and sleeves are gathered by elastic, forming a deep square neckline. And for this pattern, the pattern comes in 2 pattern envelopes, 8 to 16 on the first one and 18 to 26 on that second pattern. This is an easy to sew pattern, and the fabric suggestions would be challis, crepes, and gingham. All right. Now, would I sew it exactly like the pattern envelope shows? I'm going to be honest. Probably not. Now, to be honest with you, this pattern is definitely a skip for me. All right. But once again, this is 8691. Moving over to the next one is 8692. And 8692 is a 1970s jumpsuit and romper pattern. Now, this reminds me of a pattern I did about 2 or 3 years ago for Vintage Vember. Now, let me ask you guys this. Should I bring it back this year in November and December to sew vintage patterns? Do you think I should bring Vintage Vember back for November and December to sew a few vintage patterns, like 4 or 3 or maybe 2? One in November and one in December. Let me know. Let me know in the comment section below if you think I should do Vintage Vember for November and December. You could join along and sew vintage patterns in the month of November and December as Vintage Vember. Let me know in the comment section below. All right, so back to what I was saying. So let's get into 96 I'm sorry, 86.92. So 86.92 is a vintage 1970s top, pants, and short pattern. It features the front wrap top, flared leg pants, and shorts with zipper closure. The pattern is an easy to sew pattern. This pattern comes in 2 pattern envelopes. First pattern is 8 to 16 and the second pattern is 18 to 26. Now the fabric suggestions will be your challis, your crepe, and for this pattern reminds me of the pattern that I did for Less So Blue. I want to say I sewed this pattern up in 2022 or 2023. But the pattern that it reminds me of is McCall's 8257. Now, if you go back to that video, I'm going to put it up on the screen so you're able to see it and drop it in the description box below. The cape, y'all, that cape was showing every side boob there was, okay? Now, I kept the pants. The pants are fabulous, but that cape, baby, yeah. All right, but this pattern reminds me of that pattern, McCall's 8257, all right? So, once again, this pattern that they released is 8692. Let's go ahead and move over to the next pattern. Second to the last pattern is 8693. 8693 is the 1970s dress pattern, all right? Now, these dresses immediately remind me of 1970s fashion that just keeps coming back, all right? And the reason why is because this dress, or I should say these dresses, because there's more than one, on the front of the pattern, it looks comfortable, it looks wearable, they have movement, they don't feel restrictive, they feel like loungewear, really, like something your mom wore back in the days. Okay, but anyway, long story short, and depending on your fabric, they could look completely different. You could make them look a little cute. They don't have to look like they were back in the 60s and 70s, but you can't give them that little to where they look like 2026, okay? Now, let's say picture one version in a soft floral rayon, right? And then another in like a solid navy linen. Or a white. Yeah, something like that, right? Maybe even one in like a bold geometric print if you really want to lean into that vintage style. I'm just saying, but do what you do, girl. But I also think that this pattern has the widest audience reach as well. And why, you may ask me that, right? So, and the reason why I say that is because whether you're 25 or 45 or even 65, right? I think you could make this work. It's elegant without trying too damn hard to be, right? Just use the right fabric for this one, because the fabric can make this pattern really do what it needs to do. Now, to be honest with you on this one, for me, I will definitely skip this one, because I'm gonna be honest with you. Would I sew this one? Probably not. All right. So this one will definitely be a skip for me. But once again, this is 86.93. Let's go ahead and move over to the last pattern in this collection, which is 86.94. Now, 86.94 is a halter top and palazzo pants pattern. All right. I have one word for this pattern, and this pattern is drama. Okay. Those palazzo pants are fabulous. Okay. If I do say so myself, they have movement, they have volume, they have presence, and pair that with that halter top like they have on the front. This outfit feels like something you'll wear on vacation or a summer party or even a resort dinner. Okay. Now, is this an everyday outfit that you would wear? Probably not, at least not for me. Now, if that's your everyday outfit, by all means, do you, girl. All right. But every wardrobe needs a few fun pieces here and there. All right. So those palazzo pants would look amazing with a simple white button down shirt. I could see the halter top could work with just your regular basic, I would say straight leg jeans or even white leg jeans. Either one, it's up to you. All right. There's a lot of flexibility which is built into this pattern as well. Now, for me, this pattern 8694 is definitely a buy for me, but I can share a pattern that is also in my stash. You can get this look, all right, which I might consider and save my money and not buy this pattern as well, all right? So for the top, right, you can use McCall's 8217, and for the pants, you can use McCall's 8257, or you can use for the pants McCall's 8622, or for the pants also, you can use McCall's 8644. All right. But this pattern is a buy, or I will wait on it and just use those couple of patterns that I just mentioned. All right. So after looking through all four of those vintage patterns, right, I think McCall's made a smart decision. They didn't just pull random patterns from the archives or the vault, I should say. They chose designs that still have the potential to feel modern. Now, let me ask this. Will every sewist love vintage fashion? I'm going to say probably not. But let's talk about my favorites out of the vintage section. My favorite, without question, is the last pattern, which is McCall's 8694. And honestly, adding these reproduction patterns to this McCall Summer 2026 drop part 2, I guess you could call it, it made this collection much more interesting than if McCall had released pretty much 13 modern basic patterns, right? And I have to give them credit for that. All right. So with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about my collection award. All right. So before we wrap everything up into a nice, lovely bow, let's hand out a few awards. All right. And I figured this would be fun to hand out a few awards. So the first award I'm going to hand out is Best Beginner Pattern Award. And that award goes to McCall's 8671, which is the knit midi skirt. All right. I feel like that is going to be the best beginner pattern that you could pick up when these patterns are on sale. All right. Next award, Best Wardrobe Staple. So the best wardrobe staple goes to McCall's 8670. And that is the asymmetrical knit top. That is going to be your best wardrobe staple in this drop. All right. The next award that I'm going to give out would be the best value for your money. All right. So the best value for your money award goes to 8673, which is the athleisure set. And the reason why is because you're going to get the best value for your money if you pick up that pattern. All right. Next award, Best Men's Pattern Award. That one is going to go to 8685. That is the camp shirt and the pleated pants. Were you paying attention? Pause for the cause. Next award is going to be Best Vintage Pattern. Were you paying attention? Best Vintage Pattern Award is going to 8694. That is the 1970s top, pants, and skirt pattern. Was there a skirt on that one? Yes, it was a skirt on that one. All right. The next award, the most versatile pattern. So this one is going to go to $86.93. I think that's the most versatile pattern, which is the 1970s dress. All right. Next award, most surprising pattern. Most surprising pattern is going to go to $86.87, which is the windbreaker. That was the one that surprised me the most out of this collection. All right. And the last pattern, or last award, pattern I'll sew first out of this entire collection or drop. And that award is going to go to no other than $86.73. That is the pattern that I would sew first out of this drop. All right. Now, let's put everything together and answer the big question. You may want to know, did McCall's Summer 2026 Part 2 patterns actually deliver? So let me give you my final thought. I actually think they could have done much better, but for what it's worth, okay, they have been focusing on basics and beginner patterns for like the last 6 months, if not a whole damn year by now, all right? Which I guess that's good. So I'll give McCall Summer Patterns Part 2 a 4.5 out of 10. Not because it's a bad drop, but because I think there's something here for almost every type of sewist, okay? But for me, it's a lot of skips because I already have a similar pattern for it. But it could be for you, okay? So whether you're just starting out, sewing for someone else, or hunting for a unique vintage project or anything like that, this collection gives you options for that, all right? And at the end of the day, that's what I want from a pattern release as well, all right? So now I want to hear from you. Which pattern immediately caught your eyes from this drop? Did your favorite come from the easy to sew section, the menswear collection, or did it come from the vintage reproduction section? All right. And here's my question of the day for you. All right. If you could only buy one pattern from this McCall Summer 2026 Part 2 pattern drop, which one, just one pattern, would you choose from this drop? All right. Tell me down in the comment section below because I always love to read what you guys pick. Okay. And sometimes you convince me to take another look at some of these patterns that I have overlooked when I first dropped the video, right? So let me just say this. If you enjoyed today's review, don't forget to give me a thumbs up on the video. And if you're new here, ciao. What are you waiting on? Join the fam and subscribe because I talk everything. Patterns and capsule wardrobes and sew-alongs and fabric and everything in between. All right? So, you guys, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. If this video was educational, inspiring, and fun, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe button. Also, turn on that notification bell so you don't miss another video. Give your girls a thumbs up on this video as well. Subscribe if you have not done so already. But you guys already know, stay tuned for my next video when it's uploaded as well. So you guys, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. And as always, keep going, keep sewing, and definitely keep growing. I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Peace.